All right, you little whippersnappers. Today, we're going to be talking about Introduction to Immunology. My name is Anthony Dama, and I'm a good friend of Chucky's. And immunology is something that's kind of great relevance to modern day current events. And so, we're going to go into a little bit about the background of it and kind of how it all works. So, what immunity is it's the ability of an organism to resist infection, toxins, or aberrant cell growth. So, let's kind of break this down. Infection, we kind of get a general, intuition on this. So you have parasites and fungi and prokaryotes like bacteria or viruses, like the coronavirus, are all things that can infect you as a person that you hear about kind of in the news or whatever it may be. And so what immunity is something that fights that. And then it can also fight something like toxins, like a peanut allergy or a shellfish allergy. That's a result of your immune system. And then aberrant cell growth kind of is talking about how cancers are targeted for the immune system. Because you may not know this, but there's little mutations that happen in cells all the time that can cause cancerous growth, but your immune system can actually handle it. When you have cancer, you have it's when the cell growth overcomes the immune system and goes crazy. But what the immune system is trying to do is trying to prevent the infections from taking over, these toxins from taking over, or these cancers from taking over, and is trying to restore homeostasis, which is a topic that you should have talked about in the past, which is like an equilibrium with your environment, right? And so the way we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about a little bit of the anatomy of the immune system, some different elements of the immune system, what tissues and cells and molecules are involved, and then how kind of the immune system is organized, the different arms and branches, and then we're going to talk about the inflammatory response and how immunity is established and then homeostasis is maintained. So to start off with, you kind of have a general understanding, just being a person, about like the muscles and the bones, with like the anatomy of kind of your muscles and your bones with the mucoskeletal system, and like your heart, you do cardio workouts, you're pumping your heart, you're getting your blood through your veins and your arteries. Your nervous system, you always talk about your brain and your spinal cord and your nerves, and then your digestive system, you always talk about how like when you're hungry, your stomach is growling and your intestines and all that. But what the problem is with the immune system is you don't really have a general intuition for what is the organs of the immune system. And so the first thing I want to kind of go over is kind of the components of what the immune system is in the body. And there's two big areas. So this is kind of a diagram of all of the, This is kind of a diagram of all of the organs involved in the immune system, but there's two big ones, and that's the blood and circulatory system, which ironically isn't on this chart. But what is on here is these lymph nodes, these little green little nodules and tubes. That's called the lymph system, and it runs parallel to your circulatory system. So where you have blood vessels, usually there's like a lymph tube that kind of runs parallel to it, and these are kind of the big elements of the immune system. So those are the two big ones we're going to talk about. We're going to also talk about a little bit about the bone marrow and the thymus, but other than that, all these other kind of these other organs, we're not going to go into too much. But a lot of them, like, so when you, like, if you look on here, there's like the lungs, right? The lungs and the intestines are on here. So what your immune system is doing there is there's all kinds of bacteria and viruses that are kind of floating in the air and resting on our food and stuff, and that we're constantly consuming. And so what your body does, it's quite smart. What your body does is it kind of puts your immune system, right, the ability to fight those infections, it puts it right at the site of entry, right? And so it puts a whole bunch of immune system of your immune system in your lungs, so that way when you breathe in bacteria, which is inevitable, you can't avoid it no matter how hard you try, even if you wear like a mask, you can fight whatever infection is going to potentially happen there, and you can get rid of it quickly before it causes any harm. And so it's like nothing ever happened almost. Same thing with your food. And so that's quite ingenious. But we're mostly going to focus on the blood and the lymph. All right, and so to start off with, you kind of have a general understanding of how there's red blood cells that make your blood red, right? And then you might even think that if you just had your blood cells, you'd have like this like gooey kind of like jello kind of, you know, stuff running through your veins, which isn't very good. And so there's also a liquid component called plasma, which is very important to keep your blood flowing. It's got a whole bunch of like growth factors and stuff in there too, but that's not important. And then there's these other components called platelets, which are crucial to clotting. But what's big in your blood that doesn't get talked about too much are these things called white blood cells, or what's called leukocytes. So leuko, I think it's Greek for white, and then cyte means cell. So if you ever want to like impress some girl, you can be like, oh, I got a leukocyte, and then she'll be like kissing you like crazy. That's how I got all my girls, at least. Whatever. But what these white blood cells are, there's a major component of the immune system. And so we're going to talk about in this lecture is kind of what these cells do, and kind of the differences between them, and how they help fight infections and whatnot, and then restore your body to homeostasis. So we're going to get into that. We need to get into the organization first. And so there's the immune system. And so immunologists, people who study the immune system, they are very greedy in what they put into the immune system. And they just say anything that is concerned with preventing infection or anything at all is part of the immune system. And so what this includes is something that you might not even think of, which is the skin, right? And so what your skin provides is like a barrier in between the outside world and the inside of your body, and so that's protecting you, right? Like if a bacteria lands on your skin and then it gets washed off when you take a shower, who cares, right? And so that's part of, and your skin is the one that prevented the infection, and so that's part of the immune system. So these physical preventions, and the same goes for your little hairs that get tickled. You some dust settles on your hair and then you sneeze it out, right? The reason why you evolved that is because you're sneezing out something that could potentially kill you, right? You're physically removing it from your body. And so also the mucus lining of the respiratory system, and then the stomach acid, those are all physical preventions. But if we go a layer deeper, which is something that gets more press in the immune system, is the kind of cellular combats, and that's these leukocytes, right? These white blood cells that are roaming around in your body. These are cells of the immune system that help fight infection. And then next lecture, we're going to talk about kind of cytokines and antibodies that are also crucial to kind of fighting these things. But we're not going to get into this lecture. We're going to focus mainly on leukocytes in this lecture today. But when we get into that, it's incredibly complex. So if you look at this as kind of general summary of your immune system, there's all these molecules involved in cells and all this stuff, and I'm going to simplify it for you here because you don't need to know it to this level, right? Until you get to like a college level, if you're going to do that. But so we're going to kind of go over a simple way of how your white blood cells and then these cytokines and antibodies work. So the way that the immune system has evolved is you have two branches. There is the innate arm and the adaptive arm. And so the innate arm consists of these physical barriers, like your skin, the mucus layer, and the gastric juices that we kind of talked about, and then these cellular layers. And we're going to talk about different cells that are involved here. So there's these things called macrophages, neutrophils, and these things that release all these little chemicals called mast cells and NK cells. In the next video, we're going to talk about the adaptive immune system and the cell-mediated or the humoral arm. But this video, we're going to focus mostly on the innate system. So when we talk about the innate system, what it is it consists of the physical, chemical, and cellular defenses that immediately prevent the spread and movement of foreign pathogens throughout the body. And immediate is kind of the important thing with the innate system. So it's already there. It's fully developed and waiting to act. So if we take, for example, the skin, right? Your skin is already fully grown and ready to go, and they're preventing infection. So they put that in the innate arm of the immune system because it's something that's already sitting there fighting infection or preventing infection to some layer. Same goes with your mucus layer and your gastric juices, right? But then there's these other cells that are involved called macrophages, neutrophils, and mast cells. And those are cells that are fully grown, sitting there in your tissues throughout your entire body, and just chilling there. And then if ever something gets in, like you have a cut on your skin and there's a whole bunch of bacteria in it, it will activate and then prevent infection. And so that's what characterizes the innate immunity. And so we're going to talk about these in a more specific context. So we kind of already talked about the skin, right? The skin is a physical barrier between you and the outside world. Your hair is the same thing, right? It catches these floating microbes or allergens. Not very well, but it's something that helps in that it can catch these floating microbes or allergens before they get inside of your lungs or your body, and they can catch it, and then it tickles them, right, and you sneeze them out in all of its glory. So another thing that we talk about are that's there sitting there, your gastric juices, and you don't think about this, but your stomach acid, right, something that has evolved to break down your food. I think y'all have talked about proteins and denaturing proteins. What a low pH does is it denatures proteins. If I haven't talked about that, just forget about it. What your stomach acids can do, though, is that when you have a very acidic environment, right, when you have a whole bunch of hydrogen protons in the environment, so a low pH, what that does is it can kill pathogens just by the mere presence of your pH. So your gastric juices is something that when you eat food and it goes down into your stomach, one of the roles of those are to your stomach acid is to break down your microbes. And then another thing is your mucous membrane. So you might not know this, but there's certain organs that are lined with actually just like a gross little like mucus that's just like all over. And what that does is it's like a matrix. It's like a web of like it's like gooey like little snot stuff. It's kind of gross. But what it is it's a mucous membrane that allows you to get caught in this web, and then once it gets caught, these cells don't you may not be able to see this here. Let me blow this up. There's little cells that are all along this layer right here, and this mucus layer covers them, and so any microbes that are floating out over here, right, get caught in this green mesh layer here and then don't ever reach the cells. And so that's part of your innate system. And then there's also these things called cilia, which I might have talked about when I talked about cell physiology. These cilia, these little extensions of the cell plasma. And what it does is it's kind of like these hairs. It's a similar concept to the hair in that you have extensions that allow things to get caught in this little web, and then when these things get tickled, kind of in the same way as hairs, is that you can kind of remove pathogens. This is more kind of targeted, but it's still part of your innate physical part of your innate immunity. So these are kind of the physical barriers between you and microbes, and it's all about prevention of the microbes getting into and infecting your cells. And then the flip side of this is the cellular innate immune system. And there's kind of two components here, and this is going to be a major theme in immunology, is that there's these things called extracellular pathogens and these things called intracellular pathogens. And so what extracellular pathogens are pathogens that enter your body but don't actually go inside of cells. So they enter your body, but then they can replicate outside of cells, and they don't need to enter an actual cell. But intracellular infections, what they do is they enter your body, and then they have a second step of needing to enter your cells. And once they've entered your cells, then that's how they replicate and get really bad and cause you to be sick. And so there's these cells called macrophages, is what we're going to talk about. And you might hear the word monocyte if you ever gotten mononucleosis, right? That's an infection of monocytes. But a monocyte grows up, when it's fully developed, it's called a macrophage. And so what a macrophage